Hey guys! Tonight we're going to plunge into the icy depths of the royal vault beneath Westminster Abbey where the air is thick with musty dampness and a choking layer of lead dust. Picture this: flickering candle flames illuminating fractures in the stone. The sickly stench of dried blood entwining with the strange smoke of burning incense. And the faint echo of phantom bones rattling in your ears. That lead coffin, undisturbed for centuries, holds horrors so gruesome they'd make even the toughest historians recoil. You're not going to survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the last stone stair, and the instant you pass through that heavy door, a blast of icy air like a blade whispers across your neck, making you shiver. Before you stretches the underground corridor of Westminster Abbey's vault darkness, pierced only by the trembling glow of candlelight, reflecting off the arched stone ceiling, painting ghostly patterns in the damp air. Each breath echoes harshly, mingling with the soft moan of wind slipping through cracks, as if the cathedral itself were whispering secrets of the past. As you move forward, the clammy dampness clings to your skin, and faintly you catch a scent of power, the waxy aroma of animal, fat candles, the musty tang of velvet long, undisturbed, and the cold metallic scent of a massive lead coffin buried for centuries beneath your feet. That coffin, its rough-hewn exterior decorated with fading royal motifs, guarded a horror so profound that even the most experienced historians would recoil. Picture the scene. Archaeologists carefully drill tiny holes in the lead surface, the shards of metal clinking onto the stone floor below. Every metallic ring sounds like a dirge, and as you hold your breath, you feel your heart pound in your ears. Finally, the last seam gives way, and a sliver of light slices through the crack, illuminating velvet, stained with age, moisture, and the remnants of oils once used to anoint a corpse. Inside lies the skeleton of Elizabeth I, legendary virgin queen who stared down the Spanish Armada and ruled with iron resolve wrapped in decayed cloth and surrounded by macabre relics. Fragments of spices, herbs, and resins once used to preserve her flesh. You stand frozen, eyes glued to the ghastly tableau, knowing that any sudden movement could stir centuries-old dust and ashes into the air. Rewind to 1603. The final agonizing chapter of England's golden age. Imagine Elizabeth herself, refusing to lie down for weeks in Richmond Palace out of dread that, once she closed her eyes, she would confront exactly the unspeakable fate whispered by her courtiers: a body gutted alive, organs stripped away while still warm, a chest cavity hollowed like some grotesque carcass. That fear now hangs in this cramped vault, a spectral presence within the lead walls. When her remains were interred beneath Henry VII's chapel, every record of the gruesome embalming was expunged. Official chronicles speak only of lavish ceremony and splendid robes, concealing the Queen's true agony. It wasn't until the curious Dean Arthur Stanley cracked open the vault in the 19th century that the vault's dark secret was revealed: the lead coffin. Long corroded, split open to expose velvet drenched in centuries of fluids and decayed spices. Imagine yourself in that moment, frozen between awe and revulsion. The archaeologists' hushed voices, the rasp of tattered velvet under the lead, the soft cascade of dust beneath your boots, all conspire to overwhelm your senses. You've stepped into a nightmare that refuses to fade when daylight returns. The stench here is no ordinary death odor. It's the scent of absolute authority and dread, soaked into every fiber of fabric. It tugs at your conscience, reminding you that beneath the polished veneer of history lies brutality and decay. This smell seeps into your lungs, lodges in your mind, and you realize you've glimpsed something more than a long-dead monarch. You've touched the heart of a system that venerates power, even in death. Now, are you ready to drift into sleep? Let your mind absorb this frigid, oppressive space. Feel each breath, each thudding heartbeat, as though you stand on the boundary between life and oblivion. When your eyelids finally close, remember, you're not merely hearing a tale of a legendary queen, you're confronting the ruthless reality of power, where death and life clash in a final, brutal reckoning. Close your eyes. Let the images swirl in your thoughts, and surrender to the darkness. Sleep well, or at least, prepare for dreams that won't soon let you go. Continuing from the cold, haunted vault of Westminster, we return now to Richmond Palacethi, place where Elizabeth I endured her final, unspeakable torment. From the Grand Hall, where she once signed decrees and received foreign ambassadors, only a stifling stillness remains in her death chamber. Candlelight, flickering against carved walls, reveals the weary eyes of England's once a mighty queen. Now fading into shadow, dropsy had swelled her body into grotesque balloons of fluid, pressing painfully against her knees, hips, and the corset that once cinched her waist so elegantly. Her abdomen distended like a bomb, ready to burst with each laboured gasp. Her famed copper-red hair, now streaked with grey and falling out in clumps, revealed a shriveled scalp beneath the thick lead-white Suze powder she wore. In place of her luxuriant curls sat a cruel, stiff wig. Saturated in civet oil, every tremor shook loose flecks of powder that dusted her collar, combining with deep furrows on her forehead to create a scene both horrifying and tragic. Elizabeth refused to lie down. In those final days, she stood propped on cushions, supported by loyal ladies-in-waiting, her gaze fixed on the wavering candle flames like the last halo of her sovereignty. She believed that once she lay down, her soul would never rise again, but remain trapped in a corpse, plagued by the horrors she most feared. Night after night she was haunted by visions of her body being gutted, a liver gums torn out while still warm, the chest cavity emptied, the brain extracted through the nose. Each ragged breath, each soft moan, echoed through the chamber. She pressed a vinegar-scented handkerchief to her lips and raised pomanders of clove and powdered rose to her nose whenever a coughing fit revealed the bitter tang of blood and decay. Cloves, small sachets of savoury herbs, and licorice powder hidden in her vest pocket became her only comfort, momentarily dulling the terror beneath her regal facade. Hair attendants, hands trembling, massaged opium-infused oils into her temples. Then brewed ginger tea for her to sigh peach, drop a tiny triumph against the relentless ache in her jaw and lungs. Outside her closed door, courtier bowed low, offering whispered greetings as if she were still the commanding monarch who had faced the Spanish Armada itself. No one dared speak of death, only to murmur, "Your Majesty, please rest. May I offer you this?" At the stroke of midnight on the 24th of March, Elizabeth could stand no more. A shudder ran through her swollen form. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. She bent forward, clutching the gold-edged cushion, her terror-stained velvet robes pooling at her feet. The candlelight cast her powdered face in a ghostly glow, the lines of suffering etched deep in the lead paint. She seemed to become a statue of wax, trembling on the brink of oblivion. The court musicians, playing a mournful lute melody perhaps, a largo, continued in the next room, now transformed into a funeral dirge. Courtiers knelt in sorrow, tears glistening in their eyes. Yet none dared cross the threshold to catch the last warm breath of their sovereign. They passed her final commands in hastily scrawled letters, preserving the dignity of her office even as her flesh betrayed her. Then the light left her eyes. A long, rattling sigh marked her final exhalation. Silence descended like a shroud. No more music, no more footsteps, only the whisper of fabric settling over her still form. Farewell. Virgin Queen, moments before the lead coffin closed to seal Elizabeth's fate forever beneath Henry VII's chapel. Can you imagine yourself standing in that hushed chamber, feeling the last flicker of life slip away through thick stone walls and damp, spicy moulded velvet? Every second stretched into eternity, forging a memory that will haunt any soul brave enough to step into the past. When the coffin lid finally falls, darkness swallows all sound, leaving only the echo of a once mighty ruler succumbing to the brutal reality of mortality. Do you hear your own heart pounding now? Recalling that final flutter of history's pulse? Allow yourself to drift into sleep with this image burned into your mind. The lead coffin's lid descending a closing chapter of infinite loneliness and the tragic end of supreme power. As your dreams take hold, you will not only dream of distant lands, but also of the last, desperate breath of a queen who changed the world. Almost the instant Elizabeth's heart stopped, the chamber fell silent, except for the wind whispering through a crack in the door, and the ritual began like a long-planned nightmare. A soft command rang out, "Prepare." In response, the royal physicians and court carpenters stormed forward, their hands gripping instruments as if they were soldiers rushing into a final battle against the corpse. Scalpels of gleaming steel, polished metal probes, hooked iron gutter pullers, and a large brass basin stood ready beside her Bievry tool, poised for the brutal autopsy that was about to unfold. Her heart, now merely a relic, was swiftly removed, and the body of England's mighty Virgin Queen was treated as little more than a specimen. Under the flickering glow of oil lamps, the carpenters stretched her fresh skin taut with iron hooks, anchoring each hook into place so the surgeons could cut. The sickening sound of the abdomen being sliced open echoed through the vaulted chamber. Flesh parted from muscle like the peeling of some enormous, grotesque fruit, and the sharp tang of blood mingled with the scent of burning tallow. One team eased open the abdominal cavity with iron hooks, while another made precise incisions to expose her organs. They lifted her heart from its vault of ribs to inspect its size, texture, and any signs of disease. The liver was sliced thin to reveal fat deposits or scarring. The lungs were gently peeled away and laid upon a silver tray to examine evidence of congestion or inflammation. But the true horror lay in what followed. A daring surgeon inserted a long metal rod deep up her nasal passage, pushing through bone with a sickening creak. Then, using a narrow steel probe, he began to stir her brain matter runts, the seat of her legendary intellect, into a grey slurry. Brain tissue splattered across the cold stones, and the room held its breath for a heartbeat before the retching began. Even the most seasoned dissecting surgeons turned away, unable to stomach the sight of what had housed the mind that had outwitted Europe's greatest rulers. With her innards laid out like grim trophies, they washed the hollow shell of her body with a potent mixture of red wine and vinegar. The acrid tang of the wash burned the nostrils as it sluiced away the worst of the blood. Next came the stuffing, first myrrh and finely ground spices, then resin and chalk dust, and finally silken sifted sand, forming a monstrous, lifeless replica of her former flesh. These aromatic fillers both absorbed moisture and warded off decay. Their stitching was crude, performed by trembling hands of court carpenters, wielding coarse thread. Each stitch gaped and bulged along the length of her torso, like a spiderweb of dried, cracked sinew. Up close, one could see the rough indentations where the thread bit into skin, dried blood staining the edges of each knot. The final, most macabre touch was the reconstruction of her face. Craftsmen moulded a mask of beeswax and plaster, pressing it onto her contorted features to create a pale simulacrum of the once graceful countenance. The wax crackled at the fine creases, revealing jagged fissures where the plaster showed through an uncanny, rigid grin, frozen in eternal mourning. When the last candle guttered and died, the embalming chamber was swallowed by darkness, The massive lead coffin, now brimming with resinous fumes, awaited transfer to its tomb beneath Henry VII's chapel, piled atop the coffin of her half-sister. The mingled scents of myrrh, to wine, and centuries-old decay hung thick in the night air, assaulting the nostrils of any who dared descend into the abbey's crypt. No prayer could exorcise that image from the minds of the witnesses. They saw the waxen mask, traced a trembling finger over the sodden velvet lining, inhaled the mingled odour of plaster and coppery blood. The hidden truth of royal mortality had been revealed with incomprehensible brutality, showing even the greatest queen could not escape the terror of being carved open and dissected within her own palace. Immediately after that brutal autopsy concluded, the air along London's grand avenues still hung heavy with the scent of red wine, vinegar, and mirth, lingering echoes of the embalming rite that had engulfed Westminster Abbey's vault. Rumours of the great Queen's brain reduced to a grey soup, of her empty torso, packed with spices and fine sand, had spread from the highest courtiers to the common street vendors. Yet on that bright spring morning in April, 1603, another performance of power was about to begin. The funeral procession of Queen Elizabeth I, final, grand spectacle to affirm the divine right that no mortal could challenge. Her black lead coffin had been swathed in deep purple velvet, atop which rested a wax effigy, cast in her exact likeness as seen in 100 royal portraits. The figure's half-closed eyes and faint, weary smile seemed to greet the world, even as the body within long since ravaged by decay hung, suspended between life and death. 4 royal horsemen, clad in scarlet cloaks, hoisted the casket and marched in solemn cadence across the square, the golden thrones of state gleaming behind them against the pale facade of Holbein Palace by the sluggish Thames. Ordered into full mourning regalia, the court and nobility wore black cloaks, pointed velvet hats, gloves steeped in dried orange oil, and rosemary-scented pomanders fastened to their doublets. They formed 2 silent ranks, eyes cast downward, feet barely making a sound lest they disturb the Queen's spirit resting above them. Beyond them, thousands of citizens lined the streets, faces a mixture of reverence and curiosity. The thick aroma of incense and pitch masked almost entirely the sour reek of damp velvet and mouldy sand seeping from the lead casket. At the front of the cortege walked the trumpeters, sounding a solemn dirge that echoed through the stone arches. The soaring notes of the cornetto mingled with measured drum beats, crafting a melody both mournful and majestic. Behind them came the company of clerics, bearing carefully composed orations verses, celebrating the defeat of the Armada, lauding her virginal virtue, and proclaiming the unmatched authority of the sovereign. Each pronouncement was spoken by candlelight, its glow flickering over sumptuous tapestries and the white marble reliefs at Westminster Abbey's entrance. As the procession passed through Cheapside Market, a sudden hiss broke the stillness, the sound of gas and putrid moisture, pent up for centuries, escaping from the lead-lined coffin in soft, ragged bursts like a strangled sob from a body that could no longer remain silent. The Royal Guard, ordered to carry their ceremonial batons in one hand and steady themselves with the other, jerked their heads aside to avoid the toxic exhalations. In response, more eucalyptus, musk, and powdered cinnamon were flung into the air, vainly attempting to drown out the pained whispers of decomposition. When they reached Traitor's Gate, the cortege paused to lower the coffin onto an ornately carved dais draped in royal embroidery. A Dominican friar in his black habit mounted the platform, lifting his breviary as he intoned prayers for the Queen's soul. His deep voice rang out, seeking to banish darkness, yet at every proclamation of immortal dynasty, the crowd's collective breath caught as faint cracklings like rats gnawing dry leaves emanated from the casket. Spectators held their breath, if keenly aware of the deathly forces hovering over that hallowed ground. Following the prayers, the coffin was borne into the prepared interiors of St. George's Chapel, intended for a rare royal cremation, granted only to the highest of monarchs. Yet at the final hour, seized by fear of the stench of burning flesh, officials abandoned the pyre. Instead, the lead casket remained center stage, surrounded by bowls of dried flowers, blocks of frankincense, and bundles of myrrh, their smoke curling up to fill the vaulted ceiling. From Eastern ambassadors to Catholic and Anglican clergy, all knelt before the bier merely to show respect, but to convince themselves that the living queen lay within, not a corpse in slow decay. As the sun sank behind the chapel's crumbling rooftops, the display of power reached its zenith. Hundreds of candles were lit, their flames casting a divine halo across the purple drapes behind the coffin. Above, an empty throne stood beside King Henry VII's vacant seat, a silent reminder that Elizabeth's 45-year reign had never wavered. Yet beneath the embroidered cloth, the lead coffin remained hot and ominous-like, a charcoal ember of catastrophe, waiting for the world to dare peer inside. At last came the final fanfare of trumpets, the last rolling thunder of drums, signalling the play's end. The casket was sealed and lowered into the crypt that had waited centuries to receive it. Many lingered, heads bowed, breathing in the final lingering notes of incense mixed with decaying spice and drying flowers. They told themselves Elizabeth I's death had become legenda testament to an everlasting monarchy. But in truth, it was a grand illusion masking a harsher reality, that every splendor must confront the nightmare of death and decay. Right after that mesmerizing display of power in the cortege and the solemn rites within St. George's Chapel, you might think the story has reached its climax, but the most horrifying chapter remained hidden in the deepest darkness of Westminster Abbey's vault, where the secrets of Elizabeth I's death and decay, alongside those of her half-sister Mary Tudor, lay sealed for over 2 centuries. It wasn't until the autumn of 1868 that Dean Arthur Stanley, driven by bold curiosity, ordered the heavy stone door pried open and stepped into that subterranean world. Under the relentless pressure of scholars and the nagging urge to know, the final bolt was released, and the door swung ajar to reveal a sight that stopped hearts. 2 lead coffin sewn bearing Elizabeth I's remains. The other Mary Tudors pressed so tightly together by time that separating them seemed impossible. As the flicker of oil lamps lit the damp chamber, the purple velvet covering the coffins trembled, stained with bruised hues and saturated chemicals. Beneath the fabric, rotting wood and corroded metal emitted a single, brutal odora, rancid blend of putrefaction, melted embalming spices, and wine from the funeral rite so strong that even the seasoned Victorian scientists needed bulky oxygen tanks to breathe safely. Abbey workmen turned pale, hands trembling at the velvet's ghostly stiffness. Inside those coffins lay no trace of human form, only a grotesque chemical amalgam. Centuries-old adipose tissue, once infused with frankincense and myrrh, had become yellowed waxy masses, soft like hastily moulded dummy bodies. Nerves, no longer delicate white strands, had congealed into thick, black filaments coiled in the corners. Bones crumbled into powder, mingling with fine sand used to absorb moisture, plus shards of resin and chalk. Organ sliver, intestinus. A heart had been extracted, spiced, and dried into hard nodules as rigid as stones. The incense smoke no longer symbolized purity or masked foul smells. It stood as a feeble facade against the raw fury of death. Throughout the chamber, faint draughts wafted damp, mouldy air streaked with the sharp bite of vinegar, forcing visitors to wince. And when lamplight danced across cracks in the coffin walls, shadows of decayed fragments littered the stone flooring. Unforgettable nightmare. Dean Stanley's meticulous journal entries spread this revelation through society like a slow-rolling bomb. Newspapers and private letters alike revolved around one chilling question. If a heroic queen, immortal icon of power and femininity, could be transformed into a mobile biological laboratory, so horrifying, then no grandeur or fame could withstand nature's relentless laws of decay. Here, in this long-forgotten vault, people finally grasped that Elizabeth's decomposition was more than the brutal embalming rites of the 17th century. It was a stark illustration of life's and death's vicious cycle. Absolute sovereignty could still the winds and dam the waters, but it could not halt the bacteria and enzymes that shredded flesh once worshipped as divine. And this is just the beginning. Brace yourself for the coming chapters, where we will peel back each untold secret of the Virgin Queen's legendary decay, from the whispered controversies over separately buried organs to lost medical reports detailing the chemical reactions in a sealed coffin, and even the ghostly sounds echoing through the vault at night. For now, let the image of that crumbling lead coffin, the embalmed remains of royal tragedy, and the time-stained purple velvet burn itself into your mind, because often the most terrifying secrets in history wait to be discovered by those daring enough to face them. As you emerge from the chaos of that long-forgotten vault, if you step into the final chapter of Elizabeth I's tragedy, fateful instant when her regal breath leaves her swollen body, standing outside the silent inner chamber, you can almost hear her heartbeat grow faint, punctuated by the laboured gasps and moans of dropsy. But the true horror comes with the rasping, violent cough born of the royal disease abscess festering in her throat. A septic bomb ready to burst. You feel the oppressive atmosphere each time that dreadful cough seizes her. It doesn't just equate tears at your chest. Each hoarse bark forcing courtiers nearby to bow their heads, pressing vinegar-scented handkerchiefs to their faces as they stifle their terror. You can picture Dr. John Manningham, the only man allowed near her body, quietly noting every flicker of agony, the cracked, lead-white makeup crumbling from her face, her eyes opening in panic, then closing again in despair, as if dread of 1,000 funeral odors entering through every pore has paralyzed her will to live. Now, at exactly 3 a.m. on March 26, 1885, you witness history. Elizabeth I's final heartbeat stills. All around you, time seems to pause. The soft music that once drifted through the palace, the whisper of a breeze through the curtains. You hear her last sigh. Then only the slow drip of blood leaking onto the wood of her coffin. A hush falls over the room. No one dares breathe deeply, let alone gaze at her half-closed eyes, as though afraid to touch the soul that has just slipped away. Moments later, under the flickering glow of oil lamps, the royal surgeons and carpenters spring into action with merciless precision. You watch each step. They strip away her pearly trimmed gown, revealing skin wasted thin and pale as ancient parchment. A glinting scalpel slices her flesh, cutting deep into muscle. A steel rod threads through her nostril to extract her brain, the repository of her legendary intelligence, then churns it to a grey slurry that is suctioned out like a rich soup. The fetid stench of death, the rank reek of decay, and the sharp tang of spices converge in the air. So thick, you sense it even before you approach the door. When her organs are removed, you shudder at the sight. A heart swollen to twice its normal size, a liver engorged with fatty deposits, lungs sodden with fluid, each piece laid out and inspected as if the very secrets of her health and inherited poisons lay bare upon the slab. Next, they rinse the hollowed shell of her body with wine and vinegara, pungent solution steeped in centuries of legend, before packing it with an arcane blend of frankincense, aloes wood, crushed herbs, and powdered plaster. You can almost see them stuffing every void to fashion a great simulacrum. Stiff and lifeless beneath its velvet drapery, those rough, hurried stitches, crisscrossing her abdomen, are more than marks of butchery. They testify to the frantic attempt to immortalize a corpse. You might wonder, how could a sovereign who once faced armies and dazzled nations now be bound within a shroud of spices? And her face? Immortalized on countless portraits. tattoo now is but a crude mask of wax and plaster eerily familiar yet utterly alien, haunting you to your core. Yet the deepest terror lies not in this grotesque dissection, but in the chilling silence of the Privy Council and the Crown. They sealed every record, erased every trace for centuries, as if this horrific end must never sully the annals of power. You imagine that only a handful of courtiers and chamber servants, sworn to secrecy, witness these rites forced to conceal their dread of her spice-perfumed shell, as though the most gruesome death of a great queen must be forgotten to preserve regal authority. Now you feel her absolute loneliness. The woman who once governed an empire could not evade nature's ruthless decree, could not stave off the advance of decay, and the room where she drew her final breathants echoing processions becomes steeped in the sour odour of wine, the dry grit of plaster, and the heady perfume of spices, a macabre jewel draped upon a legend now laid to rest. You stand there, stunned by the veil of deception woven through history, glory and power, mere layers of aromatics masking an unforgiving truth. Elizabeth I may have vanquished enemies and claimed divine right, but in the end she bowed to disease and the dread of being forgotten. The most haunting part is not the dissection itself, but the knowledge that the world conspired to keep her fate hidden, so that her tragedy would vanish in silence and the smell of rot. And as you step away from that chamber of mourning, you carry with you an unshakable shock. No power, however lofty, can triumph over death, and the truth of eternal rest can prove far more terrifying than any nightmare. Immediately after those life-or-death moments and the brutal cover-up, you realize that it wasn't only Elizabeth I who harnessed the power of fragrance to sustain her authority. Her entire court had turned scent into an indispensable political language. Picture the Queen stepping into a solemn hall, surrounded by wafts of musk, ambergris, and rose oil. Beside her, courtiers, generals, and princes seamlessly mimic her ritual, like dancers perfectly in sync in an unending drama of power. You can see them steeping their leather and silk gloves in pure musk oil so that, with each greeting, the glove glints with a subtle sheen and exudes an intoxicating aroma. Their linen handkerchiefs are soaked in vinegar, infused with basil, rosemary, and lavender carefully tucked into sleeves or waist pockets, ready to press under the nose at the faintest hint of damp fabric or body odour. Even the gold-threaded brocades and crimson velvets draped over shoulders are dusted with dried flower powders. So every step feels like scattering a secret garden, luring you deeper into a labyrinth of fragrance. Every court audience becomes a lavish performance. You'll spot ministers carrying small sprays of rose water or pomander oranges tied at their hips. They stand imposingly before the throne, eyes serene yet steely, as if to say, "This scent proclaims my rank." Those favoured by Elizabeth wear the richest notes of rosewater, ambergris, and civet oiland, thus gain swifter audiences, greater favours. You sense that every breath is measured in perfume, every stride stamped with status. At candlelit banquets and lively concerts, Whitehall transforms into an open stage for a symphony of scents. Premium musk entwined with rare pitchy black tar, civet blended with incense billowing from bronze censers. Unwashed silks and mildew-softened velvet hide beneath clouds of incense, tricking you into believing you've wandered into an enchanted garden rather than a place steeped in sweat and dust. Whenever they touch a wine cup, deliver a letter, or lay down a glove, a discreet fan of their scented handkerchief delivers the clear message: I belong to the court. I bask in the Queen's favour. Endless tea. Thus, Whitehall itself becomes a perfumed arena, where power is graded by the nose. You'll witness nobles spending hundreds, even thousands of pounds on the finest pomanders, just to prove they're worthy of royal proximity. The poorer attendants, unable to afford ambergris, resort to marigold oils and dried orange peel, struggling to mask the lingering funk of sweat and week-old fabrics. The secretaries, the chambermaids, Even the porters clutch crude colognes in their jacket pockets, shrinking into the shadows whenever she appears. What's astonishing is that this mimicry isn't merely about loyalty, it cements collective authority. When you see the entire court exuding fragrance in unison, Elizabeth III seems more distant, more divine than ever. You might wonder, can a scent really hold such power? The answer lies in the swift condemnation of anyone who dares complain about odours. They're branded malcontents, outsiders lost in a kingdom, awash with aromatics. You suddenly grasp it. In this world, whoever masters scent masters the emotions of the crowd. Fragrance becomes a symbol of power, marking social hierarchy without a single word. You notice the elaborate feather fans sprayed with oils, the sachets of herbs hung at every doorway, everything engineered to hijack your sense of smell and your mind, convincing you that the court is forever pure and unsullied. Yet you know that one stray breeze, one empty vial of oil, will shatter this illusion. The sweat, the damp cloth, the dust will surge back, revealing the charade. Who would dare expose that before the Queen? No one. And you wonder, after all those layers of fragrance, do they still inhale the aroma of power, or only the fear of being unmasked? As you step away from the throng steeped in lavish scent, remember, the perfumed court illusion is more than a visual or auditory trick. It commands the nose, wielding fragrance as an invisible lever of power. And in this kingdom, nothing is more dangerous than losing your sense of smell. The moment the Queen's final breath fluttered out beside the purple velvet drapes, the solemn hush of the great hall dissolved, giving way to a new spectacle, beginning of the brutal embalming ritual you are about to witness. Until then, you had seen her stand defiantly through fevered delirium. The heavy, spicy-infused folds of her gilded Italian gown billowing with every step. You knew how gout tormented her knees and hips, how the royal cough abscess choked her throat so that every swallow felt like crushing steel. You watched the nurses tenderly spoon thin, herb-laced gruel into her mouth, while her once flaming red hair fell out in clumps, hidden beneath a cascade of wigs steeped in cinnamon oil, rosemary, and rose. Her dying decree, "Do not touch," faded. At the instant her heart ceased its proud beating. The bedroom door slammed shut behind the last attendants. And before you lay a phalanx of court functionaries from the Lord Chamberlain to the Chief Surgeon, already brandishing a nightmarish array of instruments, gleaming scalpels, long metal probes for liquefying the brain, iron hooks to drag out intestines, and great buckets for her dark blood. It looked like a ghastly feast, laid out for a macabre banquet that would last until dawn. Flickering candlelight danced across their grave faces. A lone violinist plucked a mournful melody as though echoing her final heartbeat. The ladies in waiting bowed their heads in mourning, feigning affection until she lay still. You stand at the threshold, your heart pounding, as the mighty dais that once upheld her throne transforms into a surgical slab. The scalpel slices through the pearl-inlaid underskirt with a sound like tearing silk, revealing skin etched with wrinkles and thinned by years of leady-based cosmetics and peppermint-scented powders that had eroded her flesh. Dr. John Manningham, the only man permitted to record every grotesque detail, sits at a battered wooden table, hand trembling as he jots down every move. You can picture him dabbing sweat from his brow before bending over to note when the peppermint rouge flakes off in clusters and the lead powder crumbles onto the velvet carpet. In the warm yellow glow of the candles, you see festering sores corroded by toxic makeup-oozing foul exudate. Though her heart has stopped, her body is still so warm that the nurses must breathe through vinegar and herb-shocked cloths to keep from fainting. Then you hear the pulley creak as they carve a long incision from sternum to pelvis, layer after layer of muscle, fat, and organ stagnant for years gushes forth in a slurry of thick blood. The stench of death, not yet cooled, mingles with the heady fumes of wine vinegar, frankincense, cardamom powder, and incense ash, creating a suffocating haze. You hold your breath as each rancid swirl of smoke winds its way under your nostrils, forcing you to fight the urge to flee. When her organs are finally laid out, you recoil, her heart twice its normal size, her liver bloated, her lungs sodden. Each viscera is spread on a bronze tray for close inspection. Physicians sniffing for signs of lifelong maladies and poisons. You see them rinse the cavity with wine vinegar, then pack the void with an arcane mixture of bay leaves, chamomile, dried orange peel, gypsum, and fine sandcrafting, a colossal simulacrum of her body to preserve her form before the lead coffin is sealed. The last beads of sweat on her browants, destined to vanish with her final breath now, live forever in Manningham's meticulous notes, making your skin crawl. The crude stitches that crisscross her abdomen like living scars testify to a desperate effort to immortalize a corpse. You can't help but wonder, how did a sovereign who once defied empires now lie bound in a spicer-chested shroud, subjected to heart-rending dissections and brain-scooping rituals? But the deepest horror isn't the savage cutting itself, it is the deadly silence of the court. They sealed every record, destroyed every account, determined that no future historian or curious spectator should ever know of this atrocity. You imagine a handful of nobles and servants, sworn to eternal secrecy, as if the most grotesque death of a great queen must vanish from history's pages. Now you stand, listening to the resounding thud of the lead coffin's lid, while the mingled scent of spices and decay seeps through the cracks. The pageant of power and perfumed veils has ended. Yet the nightmare of her disempowered flesh, resurrected as a monstrous waxen corpse, will haunt you indefinitely. You realize that even as invincibility is carved into her tombstones and her effigy is lacquered in gold, the truth of decay and the price paid for power can never be fully hidden. Each time you close your eyes, in your drifting dreams, Elizabeth I's makeup-layered flesh spins apart in fitful disintegration, reminding you that no throne, however lofty, can hold back the relentless cycle of life, age, sickness, and death. The moment the Queen's final breath faded beside the purple velvet drapes, the solemn hush in the great hall shattered, giving way to a new, darker spectacle. Beginning of the brutal embalming ritual you are about to witness. Moments earlier, you saw her stand strong through agonizing malaria fevers, her gilded Italian gown heavy with spices billowing around her. You watched her endure savage gout that crippled her knees and hips, and the so-called royal cough abscess that constricted her throat, so each swallow felt like biting glass. You saw nurses gently feed her thin herbal gruel by the spoonful, her once fiery red hair now shed in handfuls and hidden beneath wigs soaked in cinnamon oil, rosemary, and rose. Her last command, "Do not touch," was powerless to halt what came next. The instant her heart stopped, the bedchamber doors slammed shut behind the final attendants. Before you, the entire court retinue from the Lord Chamberlain to the chief surgeon sprang into action, armed with instruments that gleamed ominously in candlelight. Scalpel-sharp knives, long metal rods to probe and liquefy the brain, hooked steel to extract intestines, and large buckets to collect her darkened blood. The scene resembled a macabre feast laid out for a grim, all-night banquet. Flickering candles lit the determined faces. Musicians continued to draw their violin bows, the soft notes echoing like the Queen's last heartbeat. The ladies in waiting bowed their heads in feigned reverence until her body lay still. You stood at the threshold, heart sinking as you watched that once regal bed transformed into a frigid operating table. The blade slicing through her pearl-embroidered undergarments sounded like tearing silk, exposing wrinkled, ghostly skin eroded by decades of peppermint-based lead makeup that had corroded her flesh. Dr. John Manningham, the sole physician permitted to record every detail, sat at an ancient wooden desk, hands trembling as he documented each step. You could see him wiping sweat from his brow, leaning close when flakes of peppermint lipstick sloughed off and lead powder crumbled to the rug. Under the warm glow of the candles, the sores caused by corrosive cosmetics opened and oozed putrid mucus. Her body, still warm from death, was so hot that nurses had to breathe through cloths, soaked in pungent herbal vinegar to keep from fainting. Next came the creak of pulleys as they carved a long incision from beneath her ribcage down to her pelvis. Layers of muscle, fat, and organs long deprived of circulation spilled forth. The stench of flesh not yet cooled melded with the spicy bouquet of wine vinegar, frankincense, nutmeg powder, and sandalwood ash, turning the air into a suffocating haze. You stood at the doorway, feeling the murky fumes swirl around your nostrils, forcing you to hold your breath to stay upright. When her entrails were laid bare, her heart twice, its normal size a swollen liver, and fluid-filled lungs looked like organs from some monstrous sea creature. Each was placed on a brass tray for the physicians to examine, convinced they could read her lifelong diseases and toxins in these relics. You watched as they rinsed her empty shell with wine and vinegar still sour centuries later, before packing her voided cavities with a secret blend of myrrh, crushed medicinal woods, bay leaves, dried orange peels, fine plaster dust, and sand. They skillfully stuffed every crevice to rebuild her silhouette, creating a mock corpse to preserve her form before sealing her in the lead coffin. The final beads of sweat on her browants, thought lost with her last breath, were immortalized in Manningham's meticulous notes, sending a chill through you. The crude stitches crisscrossing her abdomen were not merely scars, but emblematic reminders of this desperate bid to immortalize a lifeless form. You wonder how a sovereign who once defied the Spanish Empire could be bound in a corpse armor of spices, enduring dissection, brain liquefaction, and cavity stuffing. But the deepest horror lies not in the butchery itself, but in the deadly silence of the court. They locked away every record, destroyed all documents, and forbid future historians from telling this dark truth. You imagine only a handful of courtiers and chamber servants saw it all and swore eternal secrecy, as though the most terrifying death of a great queen must never stain the historical record. Now you stand there, hearing the lead coffin's lid slam shut, sensing the lingering tang of spices and death wafting through the slightest gap. The display of power and perfumed illusion has ended, but the dread of a body stripped of autonomy then, resurrected into a giant false mummy, will haunt you forever. You know that even if they carve invulnerable on her tomb and gild it with gold, the truth of decay, the price of power, can never fully be hidden. Whenever you close your eyes in that dazed half-sleep, the powdered flesh of Elizabeth still whirls and crumbles, reminding you that no might can defy the cycle of birth, aging, illness, and death. The moment the richly draped, velvet-covered coffin emerged into the palace corridor, the funeral procession became a spectacle of power. Furiati black horses, their manes and saddles cloaked in deep purple cloth, pulled the bier. Royal guards in solemn black cloaks marched on either side, each bearing a torch of animal fat that flickered and smoked, filling the air with a rank, acrid scent. You catch the heavy aroma of dripping candles and mingled incense, the only fragrances cunningly chosen to mask the faint stench seeping from the leaden coffin. Peering from behind a velvet curtain, you see courtiers and nobles bowed low, heads shrouded in mourning hoods, gloved hands clenching posies of dried orange peel and rosemary to their faces. Their eyes are fixed on the ground. Is it reverence, or a desperate attempt to avoid inhaling the coffin's hidden decay? In that oppressive silence, only the rhythmic hoofbeats echo, interwoven with hushed prayers, for 4 slow hours. The procession wound its way from Richmond Palace to Westminster Abbey. With each jolt of the wheels, the coffin groaned, punctuated by a soft hiss the unmistakable release of gases built up over centuries inside the sealed lead box. You press close to a stone wall, as curious onlookers risk furtive glances through cracks in the velvet. Damp patches bloom on the fabric, and a rank, mouldy odour wafts from within, stinging your nostrils, though the crowds weep along the route. None dare approach too near. As the cortege reaches the great gates of Westminster, cornetto players usher in a sorrowful aria that reverberates through the vaulted arches. You feel each mournful note, like a heartbeat slowing to its final pulse. Behind the coffin, a row of Dominican priests step forward, raising gilded service books and intoning carefully crafted orations, paeans to her victory over the Spanish Armada, eulogies to her virgin virtue, and affirmations of her divine right to rule. Their voices tremble under the flickering glow of hundreds of candles, casting long shadows across marble reliefs. Once the coffin is gently lowered into its crypt beneath St. Elm, George's chapel, the lid thuds shut with a final decisive echo. Immediately, eerie sound supple creaks. Muffled rumbles rise from the darkness below. Officially, these are blamed on rats, but those who witnessed it swear they heard something more, the last gasps of a royal corpse resisting decay. In a flurry of solemn haste, the crypt door is barred once more. The vault sealed tight until the 19th century, when Dean Arthur Stanley broke its silence, just after you witnessed the magnificent funeral procession as the lead coffin descended into the subterranean vault, seemingly sealing Elizabeth I's secrets forever. Beneath centuries of dust on the stone slabsin, 1868, the historical world was stunned by Dean Arthur Stanley's bold decision. Imagine this. In the flickering torchlight, he ordered workers to fracture the thick bedrock beneath the floor of the Henry VII Chapel, opening a passage to a treasury hidden for 265 years. The echo of hammer blows rang out, bits of rubble falling away to reveal a yawning black crevice that swallowed the light. Hiding within it, an empire long at rest and never truly at peace. When the workmen lowered an iron ladder into the vault, you descended with them and were instantly struck by dank, fetid odours, rainwater, seeping through cracks over centuries, had pooled in puddles on the old tiled floor. Many wooden coffins were so cracked, and decay-ridden that you feared they would crumble to dust at your touch. To protect your breath, the archaeological team brought in crude breathing apparatus. You donned a cloth mask soaked in strong spirits, your eyes watering as you tried to take in every horrifying detail. Standing beside you, Dean Stanley carefully recorded. The black painted wooden coffins are fractured, their iron nails rusted through. The covering fabrics are matted with mud and moss. The lead lids above are oxidized and flaking away in chunks, revealing the groaning seams beneath. You fell silent each time the lids creaked open, the noise like the feeble exhalation of a fallen empire. Under Stanley's guidance, the team gently pushed each coffin off its crumbling supports. The remains of queens, kings, princes, and princesses once laid out with regal ceremony, centuries agono lay jumbled at your feet. You crouched down and saw a femur fractured to splinters, strips of lining cloth clinging to it and stained dark brown by leaking decompositional fluids. In the oppressive atmosphere, your breaths through the gas mask came in ragged bursts, mingling with faint, sorrowful echoes. Accumulated gases finally released after ages of confinement. A cold, damp chill wrapped around you as the medical attendants lowered their lantern closer to illuminate every gruesome corner. You saw fragments of once gilded embroidery flecked with earth, the smell of mouldy fabric mixed with lingering notes of frankincense and pitch escaping through every fissure. The scene resembled a collective morgue nobility, and servants alike sharing the same fate in the embrace of decay. Stanley did not conceal his own shock. This hybrid odour. He gripped his notebook. Eyes wide, is a stark reminder that all power and glory ultimately yield to nature's laws. You listened, your heart tightening as you gazed at the carved nameplates of Elizabeth I, Mary Tudor, and dozens of other luminaries. Now caked in moudarn, unmistakable testament to the fragility of even the greatest reputations. As the archaeologists moved Mary Tudor's coffin aside to access Elizabeth's beneath, you witnessed a ghastly moment. The once closely pressed lead lids of both coffins had fused entirely together over centuries, bonded like an eternal rivalry. Your hand trembled as you brushed the metal's edge, feeling its icy surface and the slight pushback from the trapped gases still building inside. By the glow of the warm lantern light, you observed the purple velvet drapery turn to a fossilized crust, stuck fast to a splintered rib. On the chamber floor, water pooled and reflected the splintered wood and broken coffin handles. Occasionally, a crew member dipped a scrap of cloth into the water, sending concentric ripple sand, an even more powerful wave of rot and stench that forced you to involuntarily step back and hold your breath. Stanley, still holding the lamp, quietly told you, "Be careful, these are not merely bones, but a warning that every great legacy can turn to dust." You lowered your gaze, the vast chamber seeming to contract as the last smoke tendrils of a solitary censored incense stick burned away in the corner. Meanwhile, a medical attendant gently folded back the final covering, revealing layers of scented wrappings and spices: frankincense, licorice root, ashes of soapberry. They had solidified into a hardened mass clinging to the bones. You saw each flake of ash mingled with wax-like fatty tissue and fine sand, forming a bizarre memory map of the monarchivery spice, a marker of name, prestige, and the dark terror beneath. Stanley hurriedly noted, "According to oral tradition, this concoction was meant to prevent the stench of decay from escaping, but instead it created a humid microclimate that trapped moisture and accelerated breakdown within this sealed vault." You shuddered as you realized that the very measures taken to conceal the royal remains had instead become the catalyst for their grotesque transformation. When Dean Stanley declared the unsealing complete, he ordered every detail recorded before swiftly resealing the vault. You followed him up the narrow stairs, glimpsing two workers hastily replacing the stone slabs. That night, Westminster Abbey's vault returned to its centuries-old silence, but the vision of decomposition democracy, where emperor and handmaiden alike succumb equally to nature, would never leave your memory. As you emerged into the first glow of gaslight on the chapel floor above, the smell of damp earth and decay still lingered on your shoes. You felt an uneasy question gnawing at your mind. How many more secrets lay buried, waiting for someone bold enough to unearth them? And if a royal treasure trove of fragrance could harbor such profound rot, then where does true power reside? In the darkness of London's night, you wondered if anyone else would dare pry open those ancient doorsaw, if some gates were meant to stay forever sealed in defense of a fragile myth. The oppressive atmosphere of Westminster's crypt still echoes in your mind as the workmen begin separating the two coffins stacked beneath the cold vault of Henry VII Chapel. For the first time in 265 years, the lead barrier between Mary Tudor's coffin and Elizabeth I is being breached. Under the flickering beam of your flashlight, you witness a haunting sight. The two oak caskets are inseparable, the lead having welded itself into a single monolithic block so that even chisels and metal awls can only pry apart a few millimeters, revealing ragged strips of blackened velvet and fragments of shattered bone. When metal clashes against metal, a sickening crack like collapsing bone rings out, and everyone steps back, holding their breath. Pent-up gases, trapped for centuries, suddenly hiss through tiny fissures, bringing with them the rank stench of oxidized lead and decaying flesh. You smell the dark exudate, soaking the velvet, bits of fabric glued to desiccated tissue, and splinters of bone raining down at your feet. Amid that nightmarish chaos, Mary's wedding ring still gleams mournfully, and a tarnished peacock of feather clasp, studded with gems, glints, feebly tiny symbols of power, rendered meaningless by the relentless force of decomposition. The fragrances once stuffed inside frankincense, gypsum powder, dried orange peel have turned rancid and mingled with the charred ashes of funerary rites to create a morbid amalgam. You feel waves of heat rising from the tangled mass, as though the spirits of Mary and Elizabeth drift together in that cramped space. Every movement of the archaeological team, every nudge of the caskets across the damp stone floor, sends the contents shuddering and reminds you that no fortress of lead can withstand time's corrosive grip. Under the dim light, onlookers tremble as the lid is finally pried open just enough to glimpse inside, yet none dare approach closer. The mold-spotted walls fall silent, save for the ragged, terrified breaths of the witnesses. The official report is hurriedly sealed after only a few sparse pages, citing a mechanical mishap during separation as though to conceal a royal tragedy and preserve the Tudor dynasty's honour. Only you and a handful of others grasp the truth. Those hollowed spaces once held more than relics. They were proof that even absolute power succumbs to decay. Mary and Elizabeth, two sisters who battled for a throne in life, have now merged into an anonymous heap, demonstrating that death shows no regard for rank. You wonder, once this fades into oblivion, will anyone ever dare record the full story? Does history's chronicler have the courage to recount how two queens dissolved into ruin beneath the chapel floor? As the team retreats and reseals the crypt, the faint odour of chemical residue and spoiled oils clings to the sooty dark limestonean unspoken reminder that no barrier can indefinitely halt the march of time or the finality of death. The heavy stone slab is replaced, the entrance sealed once more, returning that hidden realm to its seemingly impenetrable silence. But now you know that its secrets lie forever etched in the memory of rotting velvet and corroded lead. Ascending the damp staircase, you feel each step tremble beneath you, echoes of a past destiny, never fully entombed. The gas lamp's glow at the abbey doorway falls upon the mud-smeared nameplates, Mary Tudor and Elizabeth I, now more defaced by earth and time than ever before. You give a slow nod to yourself, vowing never to let this story vanish again. Mary and Elizabeth, now fused into a shared fate, confront history not merely as individuals, but as a singular testament to the fragility of human power. When the final lead lid is lifted and you bend over in horror at what lies inside, the first thing to assault your senses is the viscous. Taro, like mass coating the queen's remains, shards of bone, desiccated flesh, and grains of spices, myrrh and clove have fused together into a nameless, cold, and grotesque substance. You can lightly touch the sludge with your fingertip, feeling its sticky viscosity and inhaling the acrid scent of chaff, smell of flesh heated within a sealed chamber. The odour of power decayed over centuries, for hours. Memories of the court's embalming ritual play through your mind. The thin skin peeled from the bones, the organs cut away. Then packed full of spices, barrels of aromatic materials, myrrh, frankincense, cassia bark, wood powder mixed with blood and rendered to a living resin by heat. The internal warmth and pressure of the lead coffin transformed every tissue into this black compound, as though the queen had never truly died, but had instead been concentrated and pickled in the poison of power. You step back as your flashlight beam wavers over the skull, an image that leaves you speechless. The wax mask, originally cast to recreate Elizabeth's delicate beauty, has collapsed and cracked everywhere. Beneath that synthetic veneer, the thin scalp clings to the frontal and temporal bones in ragged strips, still stained with traces of white lead powder and scented oils. Clumps of dense, darkered wig hair remain, now reeking of mold and the acrid tang of century-old chemicals. You observe the slightly parted lower jaw, revealing tiny, worn, pitch-black teeth, chipped and eroded. These are the silent testament to Elizabeth's lifelong tooth pain. Numbed only by cloves and opium oil, these hollowed sockets and abraded enamelons hidden beneath cinnabar rougecan no longer conceal their damage. A chill grips your spine as you realize that even her laughter and voice, which once echoed through grand halls, cannot dispel the fetid heat still emanating from this skull. The attendants quickly snap a few black and white photographs to document the scene, hands trembling, eyes haunted. Then, without a word, they tear the film from their cameras and destroy it on the spot, snuffing out any hope of a visual record escaping. For each of them understands the terrible truth. This is not a historical relic or museum piece, but a living testament to our utter helplessness before life's laws and death's finality, perpetual death unfolding beneath layers of velvet and herbal charms. You glance down at the black compound under the dim yellow light, imagining the queen in her prime, resplendent in gilded Italian silk, heavy jeweled frame, high-heeled shoes dripping with gemstones. Then you perceive the brutal contrast, from monument to power to this viscous heap. All glory is but illusion. Flesh warped by spices and incense, as if authority itself could be distilled, only to reveal its own emptiness. As you bow your head and draw a deep breath to steady your fear, you think of the thousands of court attendants who once labored to fill pomanders, scent their gloves, and imbue their finery with perfumeal to reassure themselves that royalty was immortal. Yet now, shrouded in the smoky haze of charred incense and dust, you see they had merely woven a fragile veil over a pit of blood and transforming bodily fluids. The black compound's odor creeps through every crevice of stone and velvet. At your feet, puddles of the thick liquid ooze into the mortar lines, laced with wood particles and decayed orange peel. Stand too long, and your legs grow weak, as if the black flow of death itself were siphoning your strength. Your heartbeat quickens, but you dare not breathe deeply, lest you disturb the silent world beneath. When the experts have finished, they reseal the coffin immediately. They lay a salt and ash atop the black compound, carefully replace the lead lid, and tighten the iron bands. Each echoing click of the nails is a cold coronation of this secret operation. You watch the final nail driven home. Then the funeral team withdraws, leaving you alone in the dark vault. The compound's suffocating stench still clinging to your lungs. As you emerge from the tomb, your shoulders tremble. A single question haunts you. If this jetty black compound is called the Eternal Mummy to prove royal power, what is that power? Ultimately, an illusion of immortality or the final chain that binds all glory to decay? Every time you close your eyes, the image of that black mummy returns. A demonic mirror, reminding you that no one can hide from the truth of decomposition. Truth that only this viscous compound can tell. Having witnessed the horrifying viscous mass and jetty black mummy of Elizabeth I, you will never forget the suffocating stench of that Westminster vault. The spectacle shook England's aristocracy and medical establishment to its core, forcing Queen Victoria herself to intervene and ensure the nightmare of a double death could never happen again. From that Tara-like sludge emerged a funeral revolution, and you were there to see it take shape. The moment Victoria received the full report on Elizabeth's embalming disaster, the court issued an urgent edict. The embalming window must shrink to only a few hours after death. Lead, mercury, and arsenic seals poisons that trapped deadly gases must be phased out in favor of gentler techniques. Instead of heavy chemicals, royal surgeons were instructed to use spirits and vinegar, combined with mildly antiseptic herbs like rose petals, green tea, and bay leaves enough to disinfect without building dangerous internal pressure. Imagine St. James's Hospital, where forensic doctors gathered in emergency session to trial the new protocol. The dissecting table stood by a cracked window, dawn breezes drifting in to cool bodies, while the last traces of white queen's powder were brushed away. Grieving families were advised to reject harsh chemicals and choose return-to-nature burials, wrapping the deceased in linen shrouds, layering dried herbs over the cloth, then placing them in loosely constructed pine coffins. Small vents at the base and cover allowed gas to escape harmlessly, preventing the corpse from becoming a sealed, noxious pressure cooker. You yourself were invited to the very first field test at Brookwood Cemetery. A loyal courtier's relative had volunteered as the guinea pig for the novel rite. Under an oak canopy at sunrise, you could breathe free lino, acrid tar odour, only a faint herbal perfume. The pale pine coffin slid gently into the earth via a pulley cradle. The soft thud of soil marking a dignified interment, neither too loud nor too silent. You recall the forensic surgeons exchanging relieved smiles. They had finally averted a repeat of Westminster's horrors. From that day forward, green burials rippled across Europe. In France, Germany, and Italy, noble families abandoned metal cases in favour of sustainable linen shrouds and antimicrobial herb sachets. In Britain, Parliament passed the 1872 Natural Burial Act, mandating that consecrated ground offer experimental eco-eco burial plots. Graves were equipped with passive ventilation pipes buried beneath the soil, channeling gases harmlessly to the surface. You know, these ideas birthed today's fully biodegradable eco-ocosoffins, which decompose completely in just a few years, leaving no trace of metal or toxins. Forensic medicine underwent an equally profound shift. Biochemists and microbiologists launched studies on decay bacteria, molds, and malodorous gases. You heard of the London Anatomy and Forensic Laboratory under Sir William Crookes, where they developed miniature tissue humidification chambers devices to maintain ideal moisture in cadavers for research, and integrated activated charcoal gas vents to trap foul odours. All these innovations sprang directly from the Westminster Vault's grim lessons. Undertaker doctors, as they became known, earned formal status, no longer mere surgeons of the living. They mastered corpse preservation for science. At Edinburgh and Cambridge, forensic curricula added decomposition chemistry. Students donned charcoal masks to observe decay under microscopes and record H2S and methane levels metrics to ensure new embalming methods did not create hazardous gas buildups. Within a decade, from palace to parish, leather-soaked funerals vanished. You saw princes, ambassadors, even middle-class families choose green interment. Cemeteries bloomed with trees sprouting from pine coffins. Birds chirped, and the ritual of hammering coffin lids shut was a thing of the past. Services were distilled to essentials: a clergyman's prayer, a ceremonial fan sweep, and loved ones placing fresh blooms on the bier, honouring the deceased in tranquil silence instead of choking chemical fumes. You realise now, Elizabeth I's embalming catastrophe catalysed both forensic science and Western burial customs. Queen Victoria, driven by compassion and concern for posterity, wiped away the taro-stained stain of royal funerary rites, transforming them from mere displays of power into acts of reverence for life and nature's cycles. Whenever you pass a lush green grave, you sense the difference. Fresh air. No lingering embalming odour. Only wildflower scents and soft breezes. The post-Victorian funeral revolution did more than cleanse royal remains. It paved the way for today's 21st century green burial movement. When you still read about modern funeral homes offering carbon-neutral interments, you know they're continuing Victoria's legacy reform born of history's darkest spectacle. And each time you stroll through Brookwood's sunlit groves, where pine coffins give way to saplings, you understand. Real power lies in facing death and honouring life by returning gently to the earth. More humane and more sustainable than ever before. The tale of Queen Elizabeth I from her reign of perfumed illusion to the machinery of decomposition closes on a stark, unyielding truth. Every form of power ultimately bows to the cycle of birth, aging, illness, and death. Though once celebrated as an immortal icon, she too surrendered to the democracy of death, where every station in life stands equal beneath the earth. History casts every legend back into oblivion. Grandeur is but a performance. Fragrance merely a mask. And even the proudest court reduced to funerary wrappings. Yet it is precisely these disguises that form the greatest tragedy. We strive to create an illusion of immortality, while our fragile lives wait for no one. When you pass through Westminster Abbey, remember, each stone, each wisp of incense, each leaf overhead carries the faint odour of every gravers included. The price of power is not only victories, but the ultimate justice. All bodies decay, turn to dust, and return to the soil. In that realm, no title can halt the chemistry of death. You might imagine Elizabeth in her gilt Italian gown, gloved in musk and amber, wearing her flawless funeral mask, yet the reality beneath was a viscous black tar, a melange of bone and spice, and the fractured remains of Mary Tudor fused to hers. Nobles and commoners alike share that fate. Once the final breath is drawn, there is no distinction. This is the democracy of death. No crown, no rank, no ceremony can avert it. The moment life's flame flickers out, every title dissolves into the same dark silence. You, the witness, understand that no pomander, no layer of perfumed dust, no plaster mask can preserve the flesh from the relentless tide of decay. So when you pause before the Henry VII Chapel memorials, allow silence to settle. Listen for the echo of that last heartbeat rising from the tombs. It reminds you that power's cost is not only glory, but the humility of returning without exception to dust. This story is not merely Elizabeth's, it is ours. It warns that true legacy lies not in illusions of forever, but in the courage to embrace our mortality. Every time you light incense, let it burn away pretense and reveal what remains. The simple, equal truth that we all become earth again. In the end, no honorific can defy death's chemistry. The most profound testament is honesty with ourselves, acknowledging fear, celebrating life's fleeting spark, and honoring the gentle return to the soil. Only then does the democracy of death become a final, unifying truth rather than a hidden horror. And so, the world of lavish aromas, resplendent gold-trimmed gowns, and flawless wax masks proves to be nothing more than a fragile shell before the ruthless power of death. From the cold vaults of Westminster Abbey to the dark secrets of embalming, it all leads us to an undeniable truth. No matter how glorious a life may be, it cannot triumph over birth, age, illness, and death. Elizabeth I, who once distilled the essence of authority into every sachet of perfume, has finally become part of the democracy of death, where every status is equal and every splendor fades away. This harsh reality is not only a tragic memory of a gilded age, but also a warning to anyone chasing the illusion of immortality. As you step away from the stone arches of the abbey, notice each brick and each lingering smoke of incense in the hushed air. Behind the throne's grandeur lie drops of sweat, tears, and fragrant oil sore meant to hide one single truth. No safeguard is strong enough to arrest the final decay. This journey ends in the silence of the tomb, yet opens a moment of reflection. The power we revere may be nothing more than fleeting bubbles on the endless river of time. May the story of Queen Elizabeth I inspire you to cherish every moment of life and face your own mortality with courage. Let this truth be the lamp that guides your path, not to frighten you, but to help you live each day more fully. Sleep well, dream of mysterious voyages, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss our latest and most captivating videos.